Jai Shri Ram and Jai Hind. I hope that everybody had a happy Independence Day yesterday and engaged in some kind of festivities to celebrate the holiday. What I usually do for this holiday is I go to my mom's house and she cooks this big meal with chicken curry and raita and various things. But obviously, since I've become a vegetarian, we had a big vegetarian feast, and she also made some nippatu for snacks and Mysore pak for a sweet and all of that. So I ate a very large amount of food and enjoyed myself and so on. And the reason that I wanted to make this video on this day, the day after Independence Day, is that for people like me, people who are so-called second generation immigrants who are actually born and raised outside of India and have never lived in India or not Indian citizens, what this holiday means is obviously going to be very different from what it means to people who are actually Indians in the sense of being citizens of India and residents of India and so on. Where for me and for people like me, those of us who are at least somewhat rooted in the culture, it's there's a lot of kind of nostalgia and emotion involved in this holiday, but uh there's not that sense of patriotism is obviously not grounded in something that is substantive as it is for people who are actually living in India because we've never been, citizens or passport holders of India, so on and so forth. And I think that it also brings up another point that I think is very important for anyone who would be listening that is a someone who was born and raised in the West, which is that we have to be very careful of having an authentic kind of identity of who we are as opposed to a manufactured identity. And what I mean by that is this. People who are in India, when they feel patriotism, what I have understood is this is just one part of their identity. It's not really part of their kind of day to day life of their normal habits and who they are and symbols and stuff like that. It's just when something happens against Pakistan or China or the national cricket team is playing someone, or it's, Independence Day, Republic Day, Gandhi's birthday, and so on. All of these things, all of these things are when people really focus on all of this kind of sense of patriotism and the tiranga and all these kinds of things. And outside of that, that's not the primary identity that people kind of structure their basic lives on. What they structure their basic lives on is their religious identity, their linguistic, I mean, not necessarily linguistic identity, but the language that they speak. These kinds of things are actually what ground people in their culture, not the flag and the Republic of India that's only existed since 1947, and so on. And like I said, people who are born, who live in India understand this perfectly, and they don't. What I'm saying right now might not even make sense to them because they think, yeah, that's obviously so natural. Why would you even talk about it? And the reason that I need to talk about it is that people who are born and raised outside of India oftentimes don't really understand that because they come across like Korean Americans or Japanese Americans or people who are from these countries who are also the sons and daughters of immigrants, but from these countries that are basically mono-ethnic without much cultural diversity within them. And they kind of think, well, we're basically kind of the Indian version of that. So if these people kind of fly their flag and see this kind of deep cultural connection with their modern day nation state, then we need to do the same thing with India, even though obviously India is totally different. It has an extraordinary amount of cultural diversity, linguistic diversity, and so on. And so that can't really be our primary mode of identification here in the Western world, which I unfortunately see for a lot of these so-called ABCDs, American-born confused Desis. That is their kind of general identity, and that's also why they get involved in all of this kind of samosa pakora, Bollywood, bhangra kind of an idea of who they are, because the things that unite all of the people of India across religions and cultures and so on is obviously quite narrow and superficial, because the country it's not based upon something that is true for the entire society, right? It's the civilizational idea of India. You have people who are practitioners of minority religions who purposely believe in and practice a religion that is totally in contradistinction to that. And then there's all of this issue of, how can we indigenize these people? Is this project of indigenization working? Is this actually genuine? So on and so forth. And we have all of these issues that are being worked out in the society. But it's really important to understand, being proud of being Indian is something that needs to be rooted in something that's more deep than basically post-colonial independence movement era kind of stuff that's, again, not very old. It's not very deeply rooted. So that's one point that I wanted to make. And also connected to that point, as I mentioned language before, I think one way in which people who were born and raised outside of India can be truly rooted to their own culture is uh, their language. And by their language, I mean if you're from a native Hindi speaking family, Hindi, but if you're from a family that natively speaks some regional language, uh, then it would be that regional language also, not just Hindi. And this is a kind of perspective that it's always been something that my parents had given to me. But for me, because I kind of, oftentimes I had like an unrealistically pan-Indian or pan-Hindu kind of a view towards culture and everything, that I would be a lot less interested in my own regional language. But with greater perspective and time and so on, that's really changed in my life. So recently I've begun the project of trying to um, further my understanding of my own native language and also get back into the habit of speaking it. As I've mentioned in a couple videos before, my native language is Kannada. That's the language that I was raised speaking. And, I did speak Kannada at home and to, family, friends, or so on that were Kannadigas until I was about 8 years old. Then I basically switched to English. And so I have the ability to speak in Kannada at basically the level of an 8-year-old, because that's what I was doing. But again, I'm out of practice, so some of this, like the tenses and case endings and things of that nature, I would have to kind of think about what to say before I actually say it. I don't have any problems in understanding as far as conversational Kannada whatsoever. But it's just speaking it, I would need to really think about, what specifically am I saying before I say it. So that's, like I said, something that I'm practicing. And also, I used to have this problem where I felt that I could perfectly understand conversational Kannada or like TV serial dialogue Kannada, movie dialogue Kannada, but if I listened to something more formal, like for example a news broadcast, I would always have trouble with that. And then what recently I've been doing to kind of combat that issue is I figured out, if I basically understand what someone is going to say before they say it, or kind of understand the topic that they're talking about pretty well, then I can put together what they're saying, even if it's formalized. So I figured, instead of trying to watch news broadcasts that are talking about events that, maybe I don't know what has happened in the event beforehand, what I should instead do is try to find material that is talking about things that I know, like, for example, political events that have already happened, things about Modi and the BJP, and so on and so forth. And I did find this guy who's very good at public speaking, very charismatic guy called Chakravarti Sulibelle, who gives all these speeches in Kannada about various topics, especially politics. He's a Ramakrishna Paramahamsa follower. Sometimes he talks about that. And so I've been listening to his speeches in Kannada for, the last few weeks or so that I've found him. And it's really helped me a lot understand some of these kind of, Sanskrit origin words that are borrowed into Kannada and borrowed into every Indian language because, of the high place of Sanskrit and so on, where in normal conversation, if we're talking, people would just borrow the English word, but there is a Kannada word for it that should be used instead and so on. So, if anybody is watching this video who is a native speaker of a language that they've kind of become disconnected from because they've just switched to English and it's just so natural and easy because we're living in the Western world, I would say formulate some kind of organized plan like I've just described where it's somewhere between what you're already comfortable with in the language and what is just totally outside of your grasp. And just keep exposing yourself to that kind of material. And you will grow in your understanding and knowledge of your language because I think a lot of us kind of think, well, we were raised speaking it and we spoke it as a child before we eventually switched to English. Therefore, we can just pick it up if we try. It's actually a lot more, it's a lot more involved and complex than that just because when you grow up as as an older child and a teenager and as an adult, you continue to learn more words and get more practice and fine tune the skill that you have at speaking any language, which if you try to have a long, in-depth conversation with an average 8-year-old in any language, that will become very clear to you because obviously the vocabulary and kind of nuance and complexity that they're able to use in the language that they're most comfortable with is very narrow and limited because they're not an adult yet. And there's so much more that you attain in a language once you grow up, which for us, we have that in English already, but we have lost or we have not developed that in our own language. And so, this is a real way that you can actually develop that. So I hope that, that's a good inspiration for anybody that's trying to learn and relearn and further their knowledge of their own mother tongue because, something that people who are born and raised in India don't really understand is that here in America, it's very easy. It's very natural and easy to kind of switch to English because anybody that you would meet anywhere, unless, they're like an illegal Mexican immigrant or something that only speaks Spanish, everybody speaks English all the time. It's very easy. And, there's all this media in English and so on and so forth. And trying to really uphold your language and stay in the practice of it and know it, you have to really go out of your way to, only speak to your family in that language and to purposely seek out, movies or news or whatever the case may be, some kind of material in that language because so much of language is from use and hearing it and being exposed to it in different environments. It's not just being taught it as a child and using it with your parents. So that's all I've got for you guys today. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Jai Shri Ram, Jai Hind, Bharat Mata Ki Jai, and Vande Mataram.